let me just get this out of the way now. Sitting with Russo in the room. No, seriously, just so we understand it, it was like watching an idiot savant just rattle off shit.
He was unbearable. That is how Jim Cornette once described one of the men he blames for breaking wrestling. But to Cornette, that man was not even the worst. He was just one name on a long list. For years now, Cornette has pointed his finger at people he believes hurt the business from the inside. Some were wrestlers, some were writers, some ran the show from the back. All of them, in his eyes, helped kill something he loved. To Cornette, this is not a small fight. It is a war over what wrestling is even meant to be. And if you already feel the weight of that old fight, the one over whether wrestling was saved or ruined, give this video some hype right now. This story only gets stranger from here, and Cornette is just getting started. Old wrestling protected a secret. The fans were never meant to see how the trick worked. The fighters had to make it feel real, even when everyone knew it was a show. That belief was the magic. That belief sold tickets. But modern wrestling often laughs at the trick. It winks at the camera. It tells the crowd, we know it is fake, and so do you. And Cornette believes that wink is the thing that did the most damage. Once the crowd starts laughing at the fight, he says, the fight stops mattering. So tonight, we count down 10 names. 10 people Cornette believes chipped away at wrestling, one joke and one stunt at a time. To understand his anger, you need one old word, kayfabe. It means keeping the secret. It means everyone in wrestling acting as if the fights are real, even when they are not. The wrestlers pretend, the bookers pretend, and the fans agree to believe, just for a while. For most of wrestling history, this secret was guarded like gold. Wrestlers who were enemies on screen were never seen as friends in public. Blood was rare. The moves looked like they hurt. The whole thing was built to make you forget you were watching a show. Cornette grew up inside that world. To him, the rules were sacred. The ring should feel like a real fight. Damage should matter. A world title should sit on the best fighter in the company, not on a joke. Blood should be saved for the biggest grudges, so that when you finally see it, it shocks you. Comedy is fine in small doses, but it should never make the whole show look silly, and the secrets of the back should stay in the back. The fans knew something was being performed, but the wrestlers still had to make you care. Now here is the other side. Many modern fans do not want the secret anymore. They already know wrestling is planned, and they are fine with it. They love the skill. They love the wild moves. They love the jokes and the clever winks at the camera. For them, half the fun is knowing it is a show and enjoying it anyway. And this is where the war begins. Cornette does not hate skill. He does not hate young talent. What he hates is the wink. He believes that when wrestling stops pretending to be real, it stops being special. It turns into a stunt show. It turns into a comedy act. It becomes something smaller. His fear is simple. He thinks this new style may have made wrestling sillier and less serious. He thinks it traded the big mainstream crowd for a small, loyal one. He thinks the magic that made grown adults cry over a fake fight is slipping away. Maybe he is wrong. Maybe the business just grew up. But Cornette is sure, and he has 10 names to prove his point. So let us start the countdown. We begin at number 10. At number 10, we have a man Cornette sees as the face of silly comedy wrestling. His name is Chuck Taylor. He became known for one spot, so strange that it sums up everything Cornette hates. It was called the invisible hand grenade. Here is how it worked. Taylor would reach down and pretend to pull the pin on a grenade that was not there. Then he would drop the invisible grenade down his opponent's tights. Then a whole ring full of wrestlers would throw themselves to the mat. They would bump and flop and roll about, as if hit by a blast that did not exist. The crowd loved it. But Cornette did not laugh. To him, this was the lowest point of the whole sport. He said this kind of spot makes wrestling look pathetic, childish, and stupid to anyone who is not already a hardcore fan. He said it feeds the worst idea about wrestling fans, the idea that they are grown men who enjoy watching other grown men play with toys that are not real. But there is a deeper problem for Cornette. The grenade spot does not just look silly, it exposes the trick. When a whole ring of wrestlers all fall down at once from nothing, the crowd can see the truth. They can see that everyone is working together. The fight is shown to be a planned dance, and to Cornette, that is the crime. Once you show the audience the dance, you cannot ask them to believe in a real fight later. Cornette did not stop at Taylor. He aimed the same anger at other comedy names. He mocked Colt Cabana for comedy routines that kept him stuck low on the card. He even mocked a story about Cabana opening a bank account with his mother. Then there was Joey Janela, who he criticized for setting his own leg on fire during a match, with no extinguishers ready. To Cornette, that was not brave, it was reckless and stupid. He saved his worst words for Janela's role in booking the final match of the legend Sabu. Cornette said the aging star was in such poor shape that he reportedly needed heavy doses of kratom just to get through it. Cornette called that the very bottom of outlaw mud show wrestling. So the issue is not whether the crowd laughed, it is what the business looked like. Grown adults, pretending to be hit by weapons that were never there. At number 9, we move from a silly spot to a silly choice, one that put the biggest prize in the company on a man who was not even a wrestler. His name is David Arquette. He was a Hollywood actor, and on the 26th of April, in the year 2000, he won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. It happened on a show called WCW Thunder, and it was not a reward for years of hard work. It was an advert. Arquette was starring in a film called Ready to Rumble, and the title win was a stunt to help sell it. To Cornette, this is one of the most insulting moments in wrestling history. You can see why it cuts so deep. Think about what a world title is meant to be. It sits on the toughest, most skilled fighter in the company. It is the top of the mountain. Wrestlers spend years bleeding and breaking their bodies to reach it. The belt is meant to say, this person is the best. So when that belt is handed to a comedy actor, the whole thing falls apart. It tells the world that the title means nothing, that the sport is a joke. To Cornette, it spat on every legend who ever fought to make that championship matter, and it was not even a clean win. Arquette did not pin a top star. He won the belt on a fluke during a wild tag team match involving Eric Bischoff, Jeff Jarrett, and Diamond Dallas Page. In the chaos, Arquette ended up with the title, a movie star holding the highest prize in the company. Here is the strange twist. Arquette did not want it. He knew the fans would be angry, that it would make them hate him. He understood, even then, that you do not just hand the crown to an outsider. After the win, he looked lost. On later shows, he kept saying sorry to Diamond Dallas Page and tried to give the belt back. He acted scared of having to defend it against real wrestlers. And to his great credit, Arquette spent years trying to make it right. He trained at real wrestling schools. He took hard, dangerous matches on the independent scene. He even survived a near-fatal injury in a death match against Nick Gage, where his neck was cut open by a light tube. He nearly died trying to earn respect. But here is Cornette's point. None of that fixes the moment itself. Arquette can train and bleed all he likes. The damage was already done the night he won. A world title can lose years of meaning in a single bad stunt. And that stunt, in Cornette's eyes, helped kill WCW. At number 8, we reach the clearest symbol of modern comedy wrestling, a man who fights with his hands in his pockets, all match long. His name is Orange Cassidy. If you have never seen him, the look tells the story. He wrestles in denim jeans and sun. His whole act is built on not caring. He acts bored and lazy. He shoves his hands deep into his pockets and leaves them there. When he does fight back, it starts small, slow, soft kicks. He moves as if the whole thing is beneath him. The crowd roars for it. Cornette does not. He calls Cassidy pockets, and he means it as an insult. To Cornette, wrestling is meant to look like two people trying to win a fight. So when a man refuses to even take his hands out of his pockets, the whole idea of a fight falls apart. But his biggest worry is what the act does to others. His main complaint is about the serious stars who share the ring with Cassidy. When a top tough wrestler has a long, close, 20-minute match with a man fighting in his pockets, the serious star loses something. Their aura drops. Their credibility takes a hit. If they can barely beat a lazy man with his hands in his pockets, how tough can they really be? Now, Cassidy has his defenders, and they are not fools. One of the loudest is Dax Harwood, known to fans as one half of FTR. He argues that the gimmick is actually very old school underneath. Clever ring psychology and a fresh rapper. The hands in pockets act is a trick to annoy the other man. It is built to frustrate cocky heels, to make them lose their cool and get sloppy. Then, once the bad guy is angry and off guard, Cassidy strikes. He drops the lazy act and shows real, clean, skilled wrestling. And he can wrestle. His match against Pac at Revolution 2020 proved it. The jokes fell away, and Cassidy showed he was a sharp athlete who could go move for move with a top talent. But this is where Cornette holds his ground. He says the problem is not whether Cassidy has skill. Of course he has skill. The problem is what the gimmick asks the crowd to accept. It asks them to buy a man fighting with his hands in his pockets as a real threat. And to Cornette, the moment you accept that, the whole fight becomes a joke. At number 7, we reach one of the strangest and most uncomfortable names on this list. His name is Joey Ryan. Ryan became famous for one move, so crude it is hard to describe. He built a whole act around a groin spot. An opponent would grab him between the legs. Then Ryan would flip that opponent across the ring, as if the grab gave him some strange power. Fans gave it a rude nickname, and it spread far and wide online. It became a viral hit. Ryan leaned all the way in. He took the joke and built events around it. In 2019, he even ran a show with a crude name, the WrestleCon Penis Party. The whole thing was loud, rude, and built for shock. Cornette was disgusted. He called Ryan a prime example of outlaw mud show wrestling, the lowest, cheapest kind. To Cornette, the groin spot was not clever. It was a complete break from reality. It made the whole business look foolish. It fed every bad idea people have about wrestling, the idea that it is a childish joke. And worst of all, it drove away the normal mainstream fans that wrestling needs to grow. Ryan defended himself. He said his act made sense in the modern world. The crowd already knows wrestling is planned. So why, he asked, should he be tied to the rules of a real fight? He said the spot was just an old idea made new. Wrestling has always had rude, cheeky characters, he argued. He was just doing it for the meme age, the world of viral clips and online jokes. He even gave the spot a history. He said it began in Japan, in a match with a performer named Danshoku Dino, who told him to no-sell a groin grab as a joke. From that small moment, the whole act grew. But here is the dark turn in this story, and it must be told plainly. Joey Ryan's career did not end over wrestling style. It ended over something far more serious. He was hit with allegations of sexual misconduct. He was let go from Impact Wrestling and fired from Disneyland. He left the industry behind, and he later turned to Christianity. So why does Cornette still bring him up? Because to Cornette, even before all of that came out, Ryan stood for something rotten. He stood for a wrestler willing to trade the dignity of the whole business for a few seconds of viral fame, willing to make the sport look stupid for a laugh and a share online. And in Cornette's mind, that choice, that trade, was its own kind of damage. At number 6, we leave comedy behind and step into blood. This is the man Cornette calls the balding plumber from Cincinnati. His name is Jon Moxley. Moxley is not a joke wrestler. No one says he is soft. He is known for the opposite. He is known for violence, hardcore matches, deathmatch tricks, weapons, and pain. And most of all, he is known for bleeding. He bleeds in a huge share of his televised matches. This is the heart of Cornette's problem with him. To understand it, you have to understand how blood used to work in wrestling. For most of wrestling history, blood was rare. It was a special tool, kept for the biggest moments. When two men truly hated each other, when a feud had built for months, then you might see blood. It told the crowd that this was war. And because it was so rare, it shocked you. It pulled money. It sold the big blow-off match at the end of a long story. Cornette calls the problem with Moxley one of saturation. That means too much of a thing until it stops meaning anything. He says Moxley bleeds in normal weekly matches, with no big story behind them, no months of build. And when blood shows up every single week, the shock dies. The crimson mask, that famous sheet of blood down a wrestler's face, becomes wallpaper. And to Cornette, a show full of routine blood looks cheap. It looks like a low-grade garbage show, not a major sport. Moxley sees it the other way. He defends his style as realism. He says wrestling is meant to look like a real combat sport. So, he asks, how can two men hit each other in the face, over and over, and never bleed? In real fighting, people bleed. To Moxley, never showing blood is the fake choice. It is the soft, sterile, outdated choice. He points to his wild matches as proof. There was his brutal street fight against Adam Copeland, a man fans call Cope. In that fight, a weapon known as Spike became stuck so deep in Moxley's back that the referee had to physically pull it out. That is how far he goes. He also fought a savage Texas death match against Adam Page, and he was part of controversial backstage segments with Marina Shafir that pushed the violence even further. To Moxley, all of this makes wrestling feel raw and real, like the rough world of mixed martial arts. He thinks it makes the product more honest, not less. But Cornette will not move. He never says Moxley is weak. Moxley is clearly tough. That is not the argument. The argument is about what all that blood does to the crowd over time. When violence is everywhere, it stops being shocking. It becomes normal. And once blood is normal, it can no longer do the one job it was always meant to do, which is to make a special moment feel huge. By bleeding all the time, Cornette says, Moxley makes blood mean nothing. At number 5, we reach one of Cornette's biggest modern targets, a man he mocks with nicknames like Twinkle Toes. His name is Kenny Omega. To understand the anger, you have to go back to his early days in Japan with a company called DDT. There he took part in 2 matches that Cornette can never forgive. The first sounds almost unreal. In 2011, in front of a sold-out crowd at Sumo Hall, Omega wrestled a 9-year-old girl. Her name was Haruka. He treated her, on screen, as a real opponent. The second was even stranger. Omega wrestled a doll, not a person in a costume, an inflatable doll named Yoshihiko. He sold for it. He bumped for it. He treated a blow-up toy as a true threat that could beat him. him. For Cornette, this is unforgivable. His logic is simple. If a small child can be a real threat, and if a rubber doll can be a real threat, then the whole fight is a lie. It tells the paying crowd that the moves do not really hurt. It tells them that anyone or anything can win. It shows them, plain as day, that wrestling is harmless and fake. And once they see that, the magic is gone. But there is another side, and it is a strong one. Omega's supporters tell a very different story about these matches. Take the match with Haruka. They say it was safe and carefully built from start to finish. Haruka was a young, passionate student who had been turned away from real training because she was too young. The match was her dream come true. It ended in a time-limit draw, right as Omega was about to hit his big finish. And it was done so well, with such care, that it earned praise from a true legend, Mick Foley. Foley was so impressed that he openly wondered why the big American companies had not yet signed Omega. And the doll? Supporters say wrestling Yoshihiko is actually very hard. To make a lifeless object look like it is fighting back takes huge skill. It takes core strength, perfect timing, and total control. You have to throw yourself around in just the right way to sell the illusion. To them, it was not a joke, it was performance art. For these fans, Omega did not kill the business. He stretched it. He showed that wrestling could be more than two big men fighting. It could be art. But Cornette pulls the focus right back to his core belief. He says skill does not fix the damage. Yes, the Haruka match was safe. Yes, the doll match took talent. But that is not the point. The point is what the crowd is being taught. They are being trained to laugh at the fight. They are being trained to see it as a clever game, not a real battle. And to Cornette, once a crowd learns to laugh at the fight, you can never make them believe in it again. At number 4, we have a tag team Cornette holds up as proof of everything wrong with modern wrestling. Two brothers, Matt and Nick Jackson. The world knows them as the Young Bucks. Cornette uses them as his main target in his war on what he calls spotfest wrestling. A spotfest is a match built around big moves and wild spots, fired off one after another, with very little story or selling in between. It is fast, it is flashy, and to Cornette, it is empty. His first complaint is about a single move, the super kick. It used to be a finish. When a man took one, the match was often over, but the Young Bucks throw super kicks by the dozen in a single match. They land kick after kick, and nobody stays down. To Cornette, this ruins the move. It takes something that used to end fights and turns it into a throwaway. Once a finisher means nothing, he says, nothing in the match means anything. His second complaint is about respect, or the lack of it. The brothers told stories in their own book about breaking the old rules of the locker room. At developmental tryouts in 2008 and again in 2011, they drew heat from veterans. Why? Because they did not follow the old code. They did not go round and introduce themselves. They did not shake the hands of established stars like Rob Van Dam and Booker T. To the old guard, that was a deep insult. To Cornette, it showed exactly who these men were. There is more. In a company called Ring of Honor, they pushed back against the Bookers. In one case, they were meant to play bad guys against Rocky Romero and Alex Kozlov, but the crowd liked them, so they chose to stay good guys instead. They ignored the plan. They even told Kozlov to suck it. And in Japan, a respected booker named Gedo warned them they were doing too many huge moves without giving the crowd a chance to breathe. To Cornette, all of this paints one picture: selfish men who put themselves above the business, the rules, and the people who came before them. But now comes the part that drives Cornette mad, because none of it stopped them. In fact, it made them. The Young Bucks did not need the big WWE machine. They built their own brand instead. They used social media better than almost anyone. They sold their own merchandise. They trademarked their own names and ideas, sometimes causing legal fights with British wrestlers over a cheeky party brand. They built a huge, loyal fan base from the ground up. And in the end, they helped found a whole new major company, All Elite Wrestling, or AEW. They made millions of pounds, all on their own terms. So here is the hard question. Yes, they made money. Yes, they built a following. Cornette cannot deny that. But for him, money was never the only point. Did their style make wrestling feel less like a fight and more like a stunt show? Did all those super kicks and flips train the crowd to clap for the trick instead of believe in the fight? Cornette says yes. And that, to him, is a cost no amount of money can repay. At number 3, the story turns personal. This one is not just about a wrestler. It is about Cornette himself, and a night he lost his cool in a way he could never take back. The wrestler is Anthony Corelli. The world later knew him as Santino Marella, but back in 2005, he was a young trainee in a company called OVW. This was WWE's main developmental territory, the place where future stars were made, and Cornette ran it. He was the head booker and a co-owner. Here is what happened. There was a television taping set to feature the debut of a scary new character called the Boogeyman. He was meant to be dark and frightening, but things went wrong. Under the hot studio lights, the costume started to fail. The makeup began to slide. The fake horns on his head slipped off his face. The scary monster suddenly looked like a mess. Corelli was in the crowd that night, sitting with his young daughter, and when he saw the Boogeyman fall apart, he laughed. To most people, that laugh would be nothing, a natural reaction to a costume problem. But to Cornette, it was a crime. The illusion must be protected at all costs. A trainee laughing in public at a new character, in his eyes, could damage it before it ever reached the big stage. It could ruin an expensive idea. It was an act of open disrespect. And Cornette was already on edge. He was tired and angry from constant meddling by a WWE boss named John Laurinaitis, a man fans also called Johnny Ace. The pressure had been building for a long time, so Cornette snapped. He pulled Corelli aside backstage, and he slapped him across the face, again and again. He later admitted, in his blunt way, that he lost control completely. He even joked that he soiled himself, just a little, in the heat of the meltdown. And he said something dark. He said that with every slap, he was really picturing the face of John Laurinaitis, the boss he could not stand. This was a clear line crossed. There is no defending it. A grown man in charge should never strike a trainee. It was wrong, and it cost him. WWE fired him, ending his job at OVW. So why does this story sit so high on the list? Because of what it shows about Cornette's mind. To him, the laugh was not small. It was another crack in the illusion he spent his life protecting. He saw the whole business as a fragile thing, held together by people agreeing to take it seriously. And here was a young man, in public, refusing to do that. But the bad blood did not end there. When Marella went on to a big WWE career, Cornette hated it. Marella became a pure comedy act. He even had a finishing move where he used a hand puppet, a sock cobra, to strike his foes. To Cornette, this was wrestling turned into a childish circus. Years later, the two men clashed again at a fan convention in Detroit. Corelli held out a hand. Cornette tore into him with words. Corelli dared him to slap him, and both men were thrown out of the building. At number 2, we reach a single night that Cornette believes broke wrestling's oldest rule forever. To him, it was the worst blow to the illusion in the whole 20th century. It involved a group known as the Clique. They were 5 of the most powerful men in the business at the time: Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Sean Waltman. On screen, some were heroes and some were villains. They were meant to be enemies, but behind the curtain, they were best friends. And worse, in Cornette's eyes, they used that friendship to gain power. Cornette accuses them of poisoning the locker room. He says they played backstage politics and looked after themselves first. He says they used their close bond with the boss, Vince McMahon, to protect their own spots, hold back other talent, and bend the business to their will. To him, they were a selfish, entitled clique. But the real crime, the one Cornette can never forgive, happened on one night, the 19th of May, 1996. The place was the most famous arena in wrestling, Madison Square Garden. It was the end of a live show. The cameras were off, and the 4 Clique members who were there broke every rule in the book. The men who were supposed to be bitter enemies walked to the center of the ring, and in front of the whole live crowd, they hugged, they bowed, they celebrated their real friendship out in the open, heroes and villains, embracing as friends. This moment got a name, the Curtain Call, and to Cornette, it was a disaster. He was working in the WWF office at the time, and when he saw it, he was filled with rage. He has told the story of throwing his suit bag down the hallway in fury. To him, this was a betrayal, a public betrayal of the company, of the office, and of every old wrestler who ever bled to keep the secret safe. For years, men had hidden their friendships, had refused to be seen together, all to protect the illusion. And here were these 5, throwing it all away for a feel-good moment. He had no time for the apologies that came later. When Triple H said sorry to the locker room, Cornette dismissed it as fake. He said Triple H was only sorry because it helped his career to be sorry, a smooth move by a man chasing power, not a true regret. Now here is the twist, and Cornette knows it well. That night may have led to big business. The fallout was real. Triple H was the one left to take the punishment, and his planned big push was held back. That gap opened a door, and through that door walked Stone Cold Steve Austin. With Triple H pushed down, Austin won the 1996 King of the Ring. That win helped launch him into a superstar, and his rise helped fire up the Attitude Era, one of the biggest boom times wrestling ever saw. So historians often look back kindly on that night. They see it as a turning point that helped wrestling grow up and explode in popularity. But Cornette sees a crack in the wall. It does not matter what came after. The damage was the moment itself. Once the crowd saw swarms sworn enemies hug like old friends. The old rules were broken. The wall between the show and the truth had a hole in it. And a hole like that, he believes, can never be fully fixed. And so we reach number 1. The man Cornette blames more than any other. His true rival, his greatest enemy in the whole business. His name is Vince Russo. The feud between these two is the stuff of legend. It has lasted for decades. It is bitter and personal, full of insults and even legal threats. And at its core, it is simple. These two men hold opposite ideas about what wrestling should be. They cannot agree, and they never will. Russo made his name with a style he called Crash TV, which he brought into the big time in the late 1990s. The idea was speed and shock, quick segments, one after another, sudden turns, where a hero became a villain in a flash, lots of loud sexual content, and short, wild matches that often lasted only a few minutes. But here is the part that drove Cornette over the edge. Russo's shows would often break the secret on purpose. His characters would talk openly about the script. They would mention the booker. They would point right at the fact that wrestling was planned. To Russo, this was clever and modern. To Cornette, it was throwing the magic in the bin. Cornette blames Russo for the ruin of a whole company, WCW. He says Russo's booking stripped the world title of all its meaning and drove away millions of longtime fans who simply gave up and never came back. And the charges go deeper, into very dark places. Cornette holds Russo responsible for the Brawl for All, a tournament of real, unscripted fights inside a worked show. It went badly. It physically ruined a tough, well-pushed veteran named Dr. Death Steve Williams, wrecking his career. Cornette lays that at Russo's feet. He goes further still. He blames Russo for signing off on a dangerous stunt involving Owen Hart, who performed as the Blue Blazer. That stunt, a drop from the rafters by harness, ended in tragedy. Owen Hart died. For Cornette, that is the heaviest charge of all. And then there is the insult that became personal. Russo and his writing partner created a character called Oklahoma, played by Ed Ferrara. The whole point of it was to mock a beloved announcer, Jim Ross, by making fun of his Bell's palsy, a real medical condition that affected his face. Cornette was so enraged that at a later taping, he physically attacked Ferrara. He assaulted him and spat in his face. Now, to be fair, Russo has his defenders, and they make a real point. They say Russo saved the WWF in the mid-1990s. They say his fast, shocking style helped the company fight back against WCW when it was losing badly. They point to huge television ratings and big merchandise sales as proof that his ideas worked, at least for a time. So you cannot say Russo failed at everything. He drew eyes, he made noise, he moved numbers. But this is where Cornette draws his final line, and it ties the whole list together. He says short-term shock is not the same as long-term respect. Russo may have won attention for a while. He may have spiked the ratings for a season. But what did he teach the fans? He taught them not to take wrestling seriously. He taught them to laugh at the script, to see the strings, to treat the whole thing as a joke that knows it is a joke. And that, to Cornette, is the deepest wound of all. Because once you teach an entire audience to stop believing, you cannot simply ask them to believe again. The trust is gone, and without it, wrestling can never again be the serious, gripping, mainstream art form it once was. So there it is, 10 names, 10 cases. But Cornette does not see 10 separate problems. He sees one. He sees a pattern, a slow, steady chipping away at the thing he loves. Look at how the pieces fit. Chuck Taylor turned invisible weapons into part of the match, exposing the cooperation for a laugh. David Arquette, a movie actor, made the world title look like a meaningless prop. Orange Cassidy made pure apathy into a main event act. Joey Ryan made wrestling crude and viral, a thing to share for shock value. The pattern keeps building. John Moxley made blood so common, it stopped meaning anything. Kenny Omega made a child and a doll into real threats, telling the crowd the fight was harmless. The Young Bucks made big finishing moves cheap. Santino Marella became a symbol of childish comedy wrestling. The Clique exposed their real friendship and shattered the line between hero and villain. And Vince Russo put the script itself on screen, turning the secret into part of the show. Each one is different. But to Cornette, they all do the same basic thing. They take the illusion, the belief, the magic, and they crack it open. This brings us to the heart of the whole war. It comes down to two different kinds of wrestling, built on two different deals with the fans. Cornette attacks the modern wrestlers. His fans watch and cheer. The wrestlers use the attack to get more attention and sell more merchandise. And all that noise feeds right back into Cornette's platform, making it bigger too. Everyone, somehow, gains. The critic grows. The targets grow. The feud itself becomes the product. It is a perfect, closed circle of outrage, and it raises an uncomfortable thought. Now, this does does not mean Cornette is wrong about wrestling. His points still stand on their own. The illusion may well be cracked. The mainstream crowd may well be gone. But something strange has happened. The modern business has learned to make money from the very damage he warns about. It has learned to sell the argument itself. The fight over whether wrestling was saved or ruined is no longer just a fight. It is a show, and like all good wrestling, both sides are getting paid. So we come to the end. 10 names, and one long, angry war. But it would be a mistake to think Cornette's anger comes from hate. In truth, it comes from love. You do not rage like this about something you do not care for. You only burn this hot for something you adore. And Cornette adores wrestling. He adores what it can be when it works. He has spent his whole life inside it, and he has seen its real power up close. Because here is the truth that even his critics know. When wrestling is great, it is unlike anything else. The best stories grab you by the heart and do not let go. They make you stand up and shout. They can even make grown adults cry over a fight they know is planned. And that last part is the magic. Fans care deeply, even when they know it is a show. That is the gift worth protecting. Cornette's fear is that this gift is fading, that the more wrestling laughs at itself, the less it can move us, that every wink and every joke takes a little of that magic away. So he leaves us with one hard question. Did these 10 names evolve the business, dragging it forward into a smarter, freer age? Or did they teach the fans, slowly and surely, to stop believing in the fight? Because from where Cornette stands, the business did not die in one single night. There was no one fatal blow. Instead, it was worn down, bit by bit, over many years. One joke, one stunt, one exposed secret, one cheapened title at a time. And maybe that is the saddest part of all. Not that wrestling was killed in a blaze of fire, but that it was chipped away so slowly that most people never even noticed it happening. Until one day, the magic that once filled arenas had quietly slipped away.